Hello, this is a guy who likes fanfiction and is too lazy to read, so here is the Institute Saga 4 in audio form. Check the description for the links to the author. Chapter 16, Thunderbolts. In a startling announcement today, the President has issued pardons to the former criminals once known collectively as the Sinister Six for their selfless actions in capturing the Sentinel known as Master Mold, the originator of the Biosentinel plague responsible for over 1 million deaths worldwide in the last few weeks. Dr. Octopus, Mysterio, Rhino, the Vulture, Sandman, and Venom have declared their intention to abandon their former criminal careers, and the philanthropist multimillionaire Wilson Fisk has stepped forwards to help them do so. He had this to say. "I was impressed at how these six have moved beyond their pasts and sought to become better than anyone expected that they could. However, echoes of their past will still taint them in the eyes of many, despite their recent actions that have avenged those killed by the forces of Master Mold and saved uncountable millions in future generations. Therefore, taking a lead from my esteemed competitor and friend Warren Worthington Jr., I am placing a portion of my own personal wealth into establishing a new team of superheroes, the Thunderbolts. It is my hope that those who feel they have been forced into a life of crime through circumstances beyond their control take heart from the existence of this team, a team that proves that it is never too late to seek to be a greater person and that there is a hero in us all. The Thunderbolts are currently still in New York, although they are going to relocate to Chicago, where Wilson Fisk has arranged for a tower to be built for them to live in. It is understood that Superman himself has congratulated the team and offered to aid them should they need it in the future." "What?" Clark paused the screen and turned to see Isaiah fuming. "Do you know any of the six? Went up against Venom and Sandman during my independent days." Patriot grumped. "Got my ass handed to me each time. Of course, I had trouble thinking back then, before Xavier had me fixed up ready for joining you." For a long moment, silence reigned in the meeting hall, and Clark glanced at the other protectors. "Before anyone asks, yes. I am fully aware that the Thunderbolts are unlikely to be true heroes, especially given who their corporate sponsor is. That is why I offered them a base in Chicago. It's currently attracting low-level villains due to the lack of a permanent super team there, mainly due to the local laws about secret identities. This way, we get at least partial coverage, good press for aiding in the rehabilitation of supervillains, and it keeps them away from the largest cities. Plus, the local officials will finally be forced to confront the consequences of their no-secret identities superhero policies. After all, the identities of the Thunderbolts are all publicly known." Clark managed not to smile at the looks he was being given. "I may not like playing political games, but I do know how to play them." "And do they have access to the Hall of Doors?" "They do." Clark nodded. "The Hall of Doors, with multiple security systems and special sensors that can detect anything that passes through. I'm certain that they'll know that we'll be keeping a very close eye on them for a long time. Besides, I have a plan." "Oh?" Patriot mock whispered, causing Gatekeeper to cram her fist into her mouth in an attempt to not laugh. "I intend to rotate other publicly known superheroes through the Thunderbolts. Having a true hero on their team will force them to at least go covered on any unlawful activities that they may try to do. Gentlemen, welcome to your new base," Wilson Fisk said with an expansive wave of his hand. "Nothing but the best for you. You each have a personal suite 3 times the size of the ones at your old base with your things already moved in. Extra labs have been provided, and Clark Kent himself brought a portal to link this tower to the Hall of Doors, a portal nexus that explains how they were able to get reinforcements to anywhere on the planet so quickly." "Thank you, sir," Otto replied with a slight bow, even as Vulture motioned for Rhino to be quiet. "I assume that Phase 2 is ready to go." "Indeed," Fisk said, pulling out a small USB stick which he held out for Otto to take. "I had my people research the identities of every gang-aligned criminal in this city as well as who they work for. Quite a few independents are on this list as well. You will need to find a way to discover most of this information yourselves, and do try to avoid targeting my people. I've been trying to protect them as best as I can. The local gangs are surprisingly resistant to outsiders moving in." Otto nodded in understanding. "Of course. Naturally, public appearances, rescuing kittens from trees, saving children from cars, and all that stuff will be expected of you," Fisk continued, then his gaze sharpened as he scowled at them. "If you screw this up, you damage my reputation. And I do not like my reputation being damaged. You, understood, sir. Otto managed as Fisk loomed over them, somehow even managing to make Rhino seem small, before he reverted back to being a genial multi-billionaire playing with a new toy. So, let me show you around your new base and introduce you to the staff. And now, from their headquarters, the Lightning Rod Tower, we present, the Thunderbolts. The announcer said enthusiastically as behind him, 6 symbols were projected on hanging fabric screens. Formerly known as the Vulture, the Lord of the Skies, Victor Toombs, the Bald Eagle. The first screen dropped and Victor stepped forwards, dramatically expanding his now golden-brown wings before bowing to the cheering crowd. The amazing, stupendous, and unstoppable Alexei Saitsevuk is the one and only Rhino. The second screen dropped, puddling on the floor as Alexei clomped forwards, his face played up to reveal his huge grin as he waved at the cheering crowd. He can go anywhere and will knock out those who seek to harm others. Flint Marko is the Sandman. The third screen dropped to reveal a pile of sand that projected itself forwards like a jet of water, reforming into a flint as the cheers increased. Master of illusions and shaper of reality, Quentin Beck is Mysterio. The sixth screen fell, revealing only empty space behind it, then flecks of light started to appear, rushing over the crowds as they converged to form Mysterio. Chicago's own arachnid hero, a web-slinger without equal, once called Venom, Eddie Brock is Tarantulas. As the fifth screen fell, Eddie somersaulted forwards, then the symbiote retracted from his head, letting him grin at the screaming horde. And leading them, the scientific genius and connoisseur of the arts, Otto Octavius, Dr. Octopus. The final screen fell as a pair of tentacles lanced forwards around it, then Otto used his mechanical limbs to pick himself up and position himself in the line that the others had formed. Ladies and gentlemen, here to protect you, the Thunderbolts. So, why did you two change names? Rhino asked as he slumped into the reinforced sofa while in the corner. Specially programmed manipulators ran diagnostics on his powered armor. Spider-Man called me Baldy so many times, I decided to appropriate the appellation for myself. Toombs shrugged, one hand briefly stroking his hairless scalp. And I needed a bird name to go with my upgraded suit, so Eagle was the best choice. We are a hero now. Brock said as he picked up the medicinal drink that Octavius insisted that he imbibe daily to offset the negative effect his symbiote was apparently having on him. We need a heroic name and Venom is not very heroic. This still tastes awful. But until we get a new med pod from New Krypton, it is needed. Otto said as he walked in, pausing to check that the armor was being maintained correctly. I have contacted Reed Richards as his scientific knowledge is comparable to my own, and if all goes to plan, we will be able to help you and your symbiote achieve a true symbiotic relationship without any negative side effects. Good. Eddie grumbled. We did not like the idea that we were at risk of getting cancer because of our dietary requirements. How long before there are enough med pods to let the private doctors have them again? Alexei asked, earning several surprised looks. What? It's not the sort of thing we thought you'd be interested in. Toombs admitted. I have to ask, why? Alicia's forcing me to use a condom. The silence that descended on the room seemed magnified by the whirs of the mechanical arms reassembling Rhino's suit, then Octavius finally broke the silence. I'm fairly certain that I do not want to know, but I have to ask. How do med pods have anything to do with wearing condoms? She and her friends used a med pod after each fun time. Rhino shrugged. That way, no babies, and no diseases. That, actually makes a fairly disturbing amount of sense. Otto admitted. I understand now. The use of the med pod removes the negative consequences usually associated with unprotected intercourse while still allowing for maximum intimacy and the sharing of pleasure. Assuming each treatment concentrates primarily on the lower torso, I would say it would take less than 10 minutes to remove any potential disease vector or, Damn, and we thought the internet caused a shift in those things. Eddie chuckled. Med pods make random sex safe. I wonder if Superman knows about this? I'd love to see his expression when he finds out. Dr. Octopus. Clark said, offering his hand in greeting, and Otto took it in his flesh and bone hand. Welcome to the quarterly meeting for the team leaders. I am honored to have been invited. Otto replied, then he smiled. This may be the first time a villain, albeit a former one, has attended the meeting. Actually, King Marco was the first former villain to attend one of our meetings. Clark chuckled as he escorted Otto into the large room and ushered him to a chair beside a familiar-looking minotaur, a chair which had been constructed in a way that allowed him to sit down without interfering with the use of his tentacles. As Otto pulled out a small data chip and slotted it into the computer terminal in front of him, Clark moved to the head of the table. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the 5th Quarterly Super Team Conference. There are several new faces amongst us today, so on their behalf, let us each introduce ourselves. Clark Kent, Superman, leader of the Protectors. Scott Summers, Cyclops, X-Men field leader. Xavier sends his apologies, he's having problems sleeping and isn't quite with it today. The brown-haired man next to him said with a nod. Phil Coulson, SHIELD Team Alpha. The forgettable-looking man next to Cyclops stated. Captain Britain, Excalibur. As the introductions continued, Otto concentrated on memorizing names and faces, matching them up with the briefing he had received. Toros, companions of Rao. The new Olympian rumbled, jolting Otto back to full awareness. Otto Octavius, Thunderbolts. He said, glancing round to see if there were any untoward reactions. Although a couple of people were giving him considering looks, none of them seemed to be overtly hostile. Galatea, Genosha Guardians, second in command. Marco sends his apologies but, matters of state. The woman sitting on Otto's other side introduced herself and Otto raised a mental eyebrow as he looked at her, recognizing her as being the cloned Kryptonian who had been one of Magneto's acolytes before falling to Apocalypse. Turning his attention back to the introductions, he managed to catch the final one. Night Thrasher, New Warriors. Thank you. Clark said. To those of you for whom this is your first meeting, welcome. For those who have been here before, my mother is overseeing the buffet which we will have afterwards. A rumbling of approval rose and Otto leaned slightly towards the new Olympian. Is she as good as the rumors say? He whispered. No, she's better. Toros replied, licking his lips. And she gives cookies to take back to your team as well. Amongst the topics I wish to cover tonight are the new influx of Kryptonians, including methods of neutralizing any who become a threat, as well as the recent Sentinel crisis. If any of you wish to add a topic to this meeting, please enter it at your terminal now, and once I have covered the first 3 topics, I will pass leadership of the meeting to the person presenting the next topic. Galatea quickly typed several words, as did several others around the table. Clark looked at the screen in front of him, then he glanced up. Reed, Rhodey, both of you wish to cover the same topic. Rhodey can present it. Reed stated. I can never seem to do proper public speaking without lapsing into what Johnny keeps calling geek speak. Several of the team leaders chuckled and War Machine nodded. Thanks, Reed. Send me your notes and I'll try to do them justice. Is this normal? Otto asked Galatea and she nodded. Seems to be. Of course, this is only the second meeting I've attended. The first order of business is the case of Karima Shapendar. Clark stated. Due to her mutant power, she survived the Biosentinel transformation and we have confirmed she is in full control of herself, although she is still adapting to the use of her powers. However, she has been dismissed from the NYPD and has asked for a chance to join a team. The East Coast Avengers will be happy to take her. War Machine said. We have Squirrel Girl already, if things go wrong, we can handle it. Squirrel Girl? Otto asked. Pray you never go up against her. Galatea warned. She took down Thanos while he was using the Infinity Gauntlet. Chapter 17, Old Friends. Clark blinked as Eric Lenshair carefully entered the kitchen, going slowly so that his companion could use him as a support. Reaching a chair, Eric helped his companion to sit down, then took the chair next to him. Charles. Clark asked. How? You remember the med pod that arrived yesterday? Charles Xavier asked and Clark nodded. Eric made a comment about my paralysis and I realized that for some reason, I'd never actually thought about getting myself healed, so I volunteered to be the first through the pod with Forge and TechMage monitoring it to check it was safe. Walking is harder than I remember it to be, though. I did try to tell you to take it easy. Eric pointed out with a slight smile. You have been sitting down for several decades, so even with the rebuilding that the med pod did. Eric trailed off as Charles nodded. Indeed, old friend, but actually being able to walk once more. I had forgotten what it felt like. I didn't miss the cramps, though. And the pod worked perfectly. Techmage added as he entered the room. Forge is heading off, something about a blackbird. He also said something about a second pod, but I'm not sure where it would fit. We have a second medbay in the X-Men's base. Xavier commented. I'm afraid that it's restricted, though. No problems. Techmage shrugged. I'm heading out tomorrow, anyway. I'm joining the Solar Defense Fleet. My powers give me quite an advantage now that I've managed to learn how Kryptonian tech feels like. It's really different from Earth tech. Most of my acolytes are finding new paths to follow. Magneto commented. I have given each of them a fairly large sum of money to aid them on their way, but several seem to have gone into hiding rather than take advantage of the pardon that was offered. As for me, I find myself looking forwards to teaching. Clark, I must ask, should I wear a suit or my caped armor? I can probably run up a new outfit for you, one that at the very least doesn't interfere with your power. Clark mused. All of the X-Men use Kryptonian tech bodysuits, a few modifications. I could probably make it easier for you to fly as well. Unless I have a large amount of metal around, it can be fairly draining. Eric admitted. It would be appreciated. I am no longer as young as I once was. Morning, Dad. Chris called as he burst into the kitchen. Morning, Gran. Morning, Dr. XERM. Hi. Who are you? They are Magneto and Techmage. Laura said as she walked into the kitchen. Have read files. You should too. I know. Chris sighed as he pulled out 2 chairs and flopped into one of them. I'm starving. Thanks, Gran. Martha smiled as she slipped a plate of food in front of Chris, then she put one in front of Laura, who nodded in thanks. Eat up, you've still got a lot of growing up to do. So, at last we meet. Eric said with a smile, capturing Martha's hand and bowing to kiss the knuckles of it. I have heard tales of your divine cooking, Mrs. Kent. It is an honor to be in the presence of one so gifted. Flatterer. Martha giggled as she reclaimed her hand while Charles rolled his eyes. Eric. A new voice said as Mystique entered, pausing long enough to exchange kisses with Clark. Yug, kissy stuff. Chris whined. I am certain that when you are older, you will understand the attraction of, as you so eloquently put it, kissy stuff. Eric snarked. Mystique, I am glad to see you are well. I can only apologize for not attending your wedding to offer my congratulations and best wishes then. Thank you. Raven smiled as she accepted a plate of food and sat down next to her husband. It's been interesting. In a good way. I am glad to see that you finally have a true family. Magneto continued as he sat down, accepting a plate of food with a grateful nod. Although I once had one, I let my philosophical stance become more important. Something that I now regret. That reminds me, Wanda will be coming back soon, with the other students. Charles offered. She has undergone a large amount of therapy which has helped her to adjust to real life. I could not help her, so I placed her where I thought she could do no damage. Magneto sighed. I should have searched harder for a way to help her. Hindsight is always 20/20. Raven offered, then she frowned slightly. Clark, I think you and I should intercept Wanda before she and the other students return. She will need to be warned. How do I look? Charles glanced up from the paperwork on his desk. Magneto stood in the doorway, wearing a black undersuit with a dark purple, calf-length open coat that flared like a cape. Metallic boots and bracers matched the trim on the coat while set by his left lapel was an icon that Xavier had never seen before, but whose component parts he recognized instantly. The icon was Magneto's helmet superimposed over the Institute's logo. Nice. Charles nodded. You make it look good. Not only is there metal woven through this entire suit, but it contains Kryptonian technology that allows me to use my power like never before. Magneto said, a smile crossing his normally stern face. Perhaps, had I not been so arrogant and convinced of mutant superiority, I might have persuaded Clark to enter our little disagreement on my side. That would have been terrifying. Charles replied after a moment of contemplation. Well, what is done is done. Eric said with a slight shrug. I have to ask, how many of our kind have returned? Charles gave Eric a look and he winced. My apologies. Decades of habit are hard to break. I meant to ask, how many mutants have returned? All the Institute students and about a dozen others in Bayville that I am aware of. Charles finally supplied. Most of the others are remaining on New Krypton, the majority of them in New Kryptonopolis. I have seen some of the pamphlets and the apartments there are indeed quite large. Eric agreed. Why have a small home on Earth when you could have an apartment thrice the size on New Krypton? An apartment supplied with extremely advanced technology, no less. You'll find quite a bit of the same technology at Bayville High. Charles supplied, earning a quizzical eyebrow. Clark has overseen the refitting of the school so that the building is virtually immune to the use of most meta-human powers. Kitty was not happy to find she couldn't take shortcuts anymore. Eric's lips twitched into a smile. Well, I must fly, quite literally, in fact. I find myself looking forwards to this. By the way, where are you staying? Charles asked curiously. May said that you had a place, but she didn't mention where. With the Brotherhood for now. Eric said. I have asked Mystique for forgiveness and she has indeed forgiven me. It is odd, though. For over a decade, I was the one who was in charge and now, I am the second in command of the Brotherhood, answering to the one I once commanded. It is taking some getting used to. Explains why Raven's been looking rather smug though. Charles mused, hiding a smile, then he lifted a hand to hide a yawn. Feel free to laugh, Charles. Eric shot over his shoulder as he left. We know each other too well to hide when we are amused at what the other one is going through. By the way, you look like you really need to get some sleep. I wish I could. Charles whispered as the door closed. But I keep getting visions of a woman pleading for my help. Eric brushed his hair back as he heard the approaching feet. For a moment, he glanced at the helmet resting on his desk, but a few seconds of thought reaffirmed his decision to not wear it. After all, he wanted to be seen as being approachable to the students he was about to induct into the wonders of history, and wearing a helmet that cast his face into shadow would not be conducive to that end. A wave of his hand opened the door before the first student could reach it and the children filed in, some of them giving him looks of shocked recognition as they made their way to their desks. Once they were all seated, Magneto glanced at the small holographic register, which showed that all the students he was expecting had indeed shown up, before he started his introduction. Good morning, class. For those of you who do not recognize me, I am your new history teacher, Eric Lenshair, also known as Magneto, former leader of the Acolytes. I am here to show you how we all came to be here today, to introduce you to the great wonders and inspirations of history, to help you build the foundation you need to know where we all came from, a foundation that you will find helps you when you decide where you wish to go and what you want to achieve. To help you with this, I have a book for each of you. Eric waved and the stack of books in the corner rose, spreading out to come to rest just above each desk. For a moment, the books simply hovered, then they tipped and slid off the metal discs supporting them, landing on the desks of the students. The discs flew back to the corner and neatly stacked themselves as Eric resumed speaking. The book you have in front of you now is the Chronicle of the World. It is an excellent book for giving an overview of history with explanations for a great many of the events that have shaped the world that we live in, all presented in an easily read format. Most of the topics that we will cover in the years to come are mentioned in the book, allowing you to decide which parts you wish to research further. Yes. Mr. Lenshair, the girl who had raised her hand asked, I'm not complaining, but why a book? Why not simply let us look it up online? Using the book will help you learn other lessons too. Eric said, mentally thanking the girl for the opening that she had given him. You will learn how to look for things without relying on a search engine, how to identify and use the important facts presented to create your own notes and essays, how to compare the carefully researched book with the less accurate online documents and find the inaccuracies. Also, books do not need power to work, while the act of turning the pages can be very soothing. While I do not dispute the advantages of computers and the internet, it is a good idea to have at least some knowledge of other forms of research for one day. You may need them. Clark. Eric nodded as he entered the staff room. Hank. Hello, Eric. Hank smiled as he made a mark on the page he was reading with a green pen. Did you enjoy your lessons? The students are very eager to learn. Eric admitted. I could most definitely get used to teaching as a career. That may be our fault. Clark laughed as he finished pouring a coffee and passed it to Hank, who took it with a nod of thanks. The students love being taught be superheroes and try to prove themselves worthy of it. Out of interest, did I really see Patriot and Guardsman out on the sports field earlier? Eric asked as he began to pour himself a cup of tea. Connor wanted to see what teaching is like, and Isaiah was once in the military. Clark shrugged. Both of them know plenty of first aid should it be required, and Connor seems to see Isaiah as a mentor figure. Eric took a sip from his cup and winced. This is meant to be tea. Yeah, that's why I have coffee whenever I'm teaching here. Clark replied, hiding a smirk. While May Parker can make an excellent cup of tea, we kind of have leaf soup here. Eric took another sip and shuddered. Reed, why aren't you in bed yet? Susan Richards asked as she leaned forwards to wrap her arms around her absent-minded husband. I've been checking the readings sent back by the Solar Defense Force's autonomous recon probes. Reed said, using his power to stretch halfway across the room to type a command into the computer station. You need to see this. Susan sighed and glanced at the holographic image with a line of red dots on it. What the? On the plus side, the Kandorian Kryptonians should be fully empowered by then, even if they'll have issues with staying power. Reed commented as another red dot appeared. I wonder how many planets this thing has taken out. It looks like it's targeting specific planets, but what attracts it? You know, I think I'd like to test your staying power. Susan whispered, and Reed opened his mouth, then slapped himself on the forehead. I can hear Karsta's voice now. Reed, stop hugging your instruments and go hug your wife. Let me shut these down and then I'll do my best to prove I'm sorry for letting myself get so distracted. Susan sent her Kryptonian best friend a mental thank you as she watched her husband save his data and shut down the computers. At long last, he was showing signs that the training was working. Chapter 18, Political Asylum. Starship about to drop sublight. The major overseeing the tactical department called. Relaying locus now. Understood. Pass orders to the nearest vessels for intercept. The Vice Admiral on the central podium commanded, his eyes moving reflexively to the new icon flashing in the holodisplay. Do we have any clue who is coming to visit us? Not at the moment. The sensor officer called back. Doubling up scans on the rest of the periphery, just in case this is a distraction. Starship has gone sublight. For a long moment, only electronic chirps and beeps sounded. Then the TAC major half-turned. We have identification. It's a Shi'ar vessel, and it's showing a large amount of damage. Looks like it barely managed the drop to real space and, apparently power spikes are being detected. First team are moving in now. Make certain they have a teleporter or speedster with them in case they need to get out fast. The Vice Admiral commanded. The echoed sounds of energy weapons echoed through the darkened cell. Then a pair of eyes slowly opened as a voice shouted in a language not spoken by any on the ship. Hey, there's someone in here and it looks like they're being tortured. You keep smashing the power nodes, I'll open this thing up. Kineticus, stay with Techmage and prepare to shield him. We don't know what else is in there. Everyone else, keep moving. The noises faded, then suddenly, a cry of triumph heralded the opening of the door, sending light lancing into the cell, illuminating the apparatus holding its occupant so that she could only twitch and whimper. Shit, there's a babe in here. Looks like she's bleeding out. I need a med team here. Xavier. I have arrived. She whispered with a faint smile, before letting the darkness swallow her. Did she just say? Xavier. Techmage asked and Kineticus nodded, her face creased in a frown. What the hell does she want with the head of the Xavier Academy, and how in hell does she even know him? I'm here. Isaiah called as he barreled into the meeting hall where most of the team were watching a holographic screen. What's going on? I got this, Connor said as he strolled over to Isaiah. The SDF intercepted a damaged Shi'ar prisoner transport, one that had been modified to hold a single high-profile prisoner, in a torture device. The ship was attacked by parties unknown and did a crash translation into our system. The boarding party prevented it from self-destructing and rescued the prisoner. However, when she was rescued, she said something that included Professor X's name. As such, Xavier and Lady Britain are waiting for her to finish getting dressed after her session in the med pod so they can start asking questions. Patriot nodded his gratitude as he joined the others. On the screen, Xavier and Braddock were waiting on a large room, Xavier in his customary, but no longer necessary, floating chair while Betsy was slowly pacing near the view screen set to show the moonscape. She turned as the door opened and the rescued prisoner entered, clad in a silvery gray jumpsuit. Odd tattoos, Patriot noted, fingers tapping beside his eyes to indicate what he was talking about. Hayata Ikariako Xavier. Xavier floated forwards and stared into the former prisoner's eyes. After a moment, she nodded and Xavier reached up, placing his fingertips on her forehead. Both of them closed their eyes for a long moment as Betsy moved one of the chairs to behind the alien woman, then Xavier broke contact. The woman staggered and Betsy caught her, guiding her into the chair. Ataya Hanatho. Yeradashia Hitani. Akiru Hamaleo English. Yelaya. I mean, amazing. I can speak it. The woman gasped, her eyes widening. Welcome to Moonbase Alpha, Sol System, Betsy said as she pulled up a chair of her own. I am Lady Britain and this is Charles Xavier. The woman finished. I know. Our minds have been meeting for a while, ever since I was placed in captivity. My name is Lilandra Naramani, former Grand Admiral of the Imperial Guard and the younger sister of Emperor Dekan of the Shi'ar. I was imprisoned and branded as a traitor when I sought to prevent my brother from making a mistake that will doom us all. He has found the end of all that is, the M'Kron crystal, and he intends to use it to begin a war of expansion against both the Kree and the Skrulls. That can't be good, Patriot commented. That sounds inadvisable, Xavier said slowly. Judging from all that I have heard about the Kree and Skrull, anyone going to war against both of them at once is doomed, unless they have Kryptonian technology or better. You know about the Kryptonians? Lilandra gasped. How? We have several million of them living in our solar system. Xavier smiled and Lilandra's eyes widened. Then, you can help. I will do my best, but it will take time, Xavier replied. You have my word. That was too quick, Connor grumbled. We haven't confirmed anything she's told us. Actually, she is speaking the truth and nothing back. A new voice offered and everyone looked round to see Sage floating in on her own Kryptonian hover chair, a smile on her face. My young friend let me use his teaching her English as an opening to scan her mind. She is far more worried about her brother's megalomania and what it will do to the Shi'ar Empire. Maybe I should start the ball rolling, Clark mused. Let's give her a couple of days to adjust, then I'll introduce her to the Solar Council. Aren't they still trying to change the requirements for membership? Isaiah asked curiously. They stopped when Zed offered to take over any country trying to rules lawyer the process. Clark laughed. Having several million Kryptonians backing him up does give his threat a certain validity. Of course, if not for Ursa's presence and the effect she's having on Zed, I would be rather worried given his driven personality. Speaking of, did you know that she's my godmother? I came across her and Martha talking about how you were as a baby. Morph snickered, earning a pained look from Clark. Martha had pulled out all of the baby photos. Great. Clark sighed. Thanks, Mom. Welcome to the Xavier Institute for Higher Learning. Charles smiled as he led Lilandra out of the door room and into the entrance hall of the mansion. Several of the students who were making their way through gave them curious looks, but continued on their way. Here, we help those newly come into their powers learn to control them, even master them. We were on the moon, Lilandra said in wonder as she looked out of the windows flanking the main door. Now we are here, how? Modified Asgardian technology, Xavier supplied. I'll try to get permission to show you later. Asgard is a truly amazing place. For now, though, we are on Earth, one of the two habitable planets in the solar system and the original planet of the human race. The country is called America and the local area is Bayville. I know these names may not mean much to you now, but they'll help if you wish to research them. I will. Lilandra said in a tone that was half acceptance and half promise. You train many here. This is the first of the places that does, but there are others. Xavier shrugged. New York has the Avenger Cadets, although that's more of a school club where about half of the children have powers of some sort. It was created so that young Harry could play with other children and it kind of grew from there. A similar thing is on the West Coast. Rhodey saw it and decided it was a good idea. Other super teams have followed suit. The Henshin Rangers have the Henshin trainees, for instance. Some places like Genosha have lessons for those with powers as part of their educational curriculum. But as the first and the one linked to both the X-Men and Superman, yes. Many with powers have chosen to live in Bayville and attend the weekend lessons we offer. Lilandra looked impressed as Charles led her to the back gardens, then he sat down on one of the chairs with a sigh. Sorry, I'm still working on my stamina. Medpods may be capable of near miraculous healing, but there are limits even for them. While it is more psychosomatic rather than physical, I do get tired out rather quickly when walking. Lilandra raised a querying eyebrow as she sat down on the chair opposite him, leaning forwards to rest her arms on the table. Looks like they're getting along well. Logan stated as he looked down at them from the balcony. Odd, though. That dame smells like a bird, the feathered kind. Charles always had a thing for taking in strays. Eric Lenshair noted before taking a sip of the mug of tea he was holding. In a way, it's how he and I met. Clark'll be here soon. Logan grunted. You going to try and talk to your daughter once he's here? I am. Eric confirmed quietly. Perhaps this time, she will allow me to apologize and try to make up for my many mistakes with her. And if she doesn't, you can always hide behind the Boy Scout. Logan scoffed. A most excellent suggestion, Logan. Logan blinked. Wait. What? Clark. Scott called as he vaulted out of his car. Clark smiled as he walked down the steps. Scott, I heard you coming. How did it go? Pretty good. Scott grinned as he activated the secondary function of his watch before removing his visor. Finished helping to demolish the buildings that were severely damaged by the Sentinels. Blob really does a lot of damage when he does a shoulder roll into a wall. Avalanche helped by cracking several support pillars from a distance, making it easier to take down the buildings. It's good to see you're getting on well with them. Clark smiled as he and Scott entered the mansion. By the way, where's Jean? Wasn't she with you? She had me drop her off at the mall. Scott shrugged. Several of the others were there and she said she'd hitch a lift back with them in the van. Clark nodded. Rogue went off with Storm and Jubilee to get some new clothes. Must be them that Jean's meeting up with. Have to admit, though, that things are rather quiet. Scott sighed, then he looked round worriedly. Not saying I want another Sentinel attack or anything like that, but things are quite quiet. Probably a good thing. Clark agreed. Oh, any luck on unshrinking those planets you recovered from Brainiac? No. Clark growled. We were able to restore Kandor, but Brainiac had obviously learned from it. He used a similar method on the planets, but one just different enough that we can't unshrink them the same way. In addition, Tony and Reed managed to get some idea of the energy costs needed to overcome the technique he used and 6 months of total planetary power output. Well, could you just store it up and do one at a time? Scott asked, causing Clark to look askance at him. 6 months, per planet. Oh. I see. Yeah, that would be a problem. Zed said that once he's finished with setting up the defensive systems he wants in place to protect Earth and New Krypton, he'll see about diverting some power generation capacity towards the planets, but it'll take him a few years. What's he doing? Scott asked and Clark shrugged. I haven't actually asked, but the other two of the Triumvirate both approve of it, as does Ursa, so it's not going to be anything bad. Now that you mention it, perhaps I should ask. Just to be on the safe side. Scott started to answer, Then he paused. Sorry, Clark, the professor wants me. Speak to you soon. Clark turned to head to his quarters as Scott jogged off down the hall. Tilting his head slightly, he listened for 3 familiar heartbeats, then started to jog so that he could join them. Good afternoon. Modoc froze as the unexpected voice spoke, then he manipulated the low-level repulsors in his life support chair to turn away from the computer he was interfacing with. As he rotated, he activated the secondary scanning arrays in his chair in addition to activating, but not deploying, the energy blaster underneath his left armrest. Halting his rotation, he stared at the person smiling at him from the doorway of his hidden lair. You appear to be Dr. Armanzola, but all files indicate that he died several decades ago. Are you a relative of his? I am Armanzola. The man replied, his skin briefly shifting silver and back. Before I died, I had myself uploaded into a computer, that I would not truly die. Master Mold granted me a new body and now, I seek someone to work alongside as I resurrect Hydra once more. Given the recent events, would such a task be possible? Modoc asked and Zola shrugged. I do not know. There are still remnants of Hydra out there, waiting to be reunited. I have already contacted several, very carefully, and they are ready. It will be decades before we stand a chance of making a true move once more, yet with your help, we may reduce that time. No. Modoc said firmly. To reduce the time frame would be to raise the risk of failure. Plans must be made, tested and adapted. Resources gathered. A new base found, one that must be located somewhere that is immune to attack, giving us a chance to build our forces without being noticed by those who seek to preserve the status quo. Zola hid a smirk as he noted how Modoc had included himself in his description of what Hydra needed. I have spoken to one whose entire family has been with Hydra since the day it was formed. You have heard of him, noted industrialist Gideon Malik. He has even provided me with data on a portal Hydra has been experimenting with for centuries. I believe that it is worth a look. After all, locating Hydra's main base in a different reality would be extremely secure. Chapter 19, Expedition. And so, I come before you to plead for aid. Lilandra said, her musical voice carrying across the United Nations Assembly. My brother seeks to destroy all in his path, a desire for destruction that will inevitably result in you coming to his attention, and if he is not stopped, he will be able to crush you even though you are allies with the Kryptonians. She is good. Zed noted as he and Clark watched the transmission. And she has a point. The Shi'ar vessel was using Kryptonian technology and it wasn't a frontline vessel. Fortunately, they didn't get more than a tithe of that which survived Krypton's destruction. My people are scavenging all the remaining technology still in Rao. Clark blinked. Isn't that the name of our god? Zed nodded. It is. Also the name of the star, although humans know it as LHS 2520. I occasionally amuse myself by wondering just what name they would have given it. Where is it? Clark asked curiously. There are so many stars up there, where should I be looking? You need a telescope or similar, although given our enhanced vision, that might not actually be true, now that I come to think about it. Zed replied. Look for the human constellation Corvus, then draw an imaginary line from the lowest star to the upper one. Extend the line upwards by half its length and that's where you'll see Rao. If the telescope is big enough or you're using the stellar array, you can even see the asteroid field that was once Krypton. But it looks like Lilandra's finished her speech. Clark turned back to see Lilandra leave the stage and Zed snarled. Look at them. Listen to them. Small-minded politicians, each trying to find a reason not to help her while goading their neighbors into taking up the burden instead. There are times that I despair about the future of Earth, if people like these are in charge. And then I meet people like King Marco and King T'Challa and realize that there is indeed hope. I have no idea how to respond to that. Clark admitted. Just imagine what would happen if Steve Rogers agreed to become president. After all, I know that he got 8% of the vote on the last election as a write-in candidate. Zed added with a wry smile. He'd probably end up protecting the Secret Service agents. I think I heard something about that. Clark admitted. I didn't pay it all that much attention, though. I don't remember them saying who it was. And no one mentioned that you got 7% of the vote? Zed asked, causing Clark to stare at him in shock. I see not. Interesting, I may need to have the news companies investigated. Wait. What? Zed turned and strode off, half turning to continue talking. I believe it is time to call for a meeting. Hang on. Clark muttered. 7%? What? Hey, wait up. Morons. Idiots. Jacques Fools. Lilandra cursed as she stomped through the doors. I seek help to save the universe, and what do I find? Worthless, spineless Yaharakonaguks that can't make a decision more complicated than which shoe to seal first. I think she's pissed. Juggernaut chuckled, causing Lilandra to freeze as she realized that she had entered a room full of people. Lilandra, welcome. Zed said, rising from his seat at the head of the table to give her a bow of welcome. On behalf of those of us who do know how to make decisions, I apologize for subjecting you to the self-serving politicians. I assure you, we do try to prevent them from screwing things up too badly, but all they really care about is getting elected. Too Urakal true. Lily Nara sighed as she sat down in the chair at the foot of the long table, Charles taking his place beside her. So, I assume that I am now facing the true decision-makers of Sol System. To a degree. Zed shrugged. I personally represent the triumvirate of New Krypton, the other two have said that they'll support my decision on this matter. As for this world, it is those who are willing to go of their own free will that you need to persuade. Not politicians, but heroes. And that is why we are here. Before you are the leaders of many of the superhero teams, or those allied to them. This discussion is being broadcast to all the super teams on both Earth and New Krypton. They already know what is at stake. Lilandra's eyes widened as Zed spoke. You mean? We will help. Zed confirmed as Clark, sat beside him, nodded. I will place a division of cruisers at your service. I have already received requests from a score of Kryptonians who seek adventure, and over 100 times that number of humans have volunteered to aid. The vessels will have full crews, well-trained crews, and full complements of soldiers to aid you. Lily Nara inhaled sharply, then she tried to speak but failed. Charles placed a hand on her shoulder and smiled at her before turning to face the others. What Lily Nara is failing to say is, thank you. He said, and Lily Nara nodded in confirmation. That's not all. Scott Summers noted. As well as tech-enhanced humans, you're getting a powered contingent as well. I'll be leading it with Jean as my second. In my absence, Talon is taking over as leader of the X-Men. I've asked Logan to go easy on him. Thank you. Lily Nara whispered. Oh, Clark, since I'm going as well, I've asked an old friend to take over running the Institute for me. Charles added. Clark shot him a curious look and Charles smiled impishly. He'll be waiting for us in my office after the meeting. Welcome back, old friend. It's good to be back, old friend. Charles returned as Clark stared in shock at the man sitting behind the desk as if he'd always been there. Wait. Clark finally said. This may come out wrong, so I'm sorry in advance, but... Magneto. You think my old friend invited me over simply to see his house and ability to walk once more? Magneto asked, the corner of his mouth curling into a wry smile. No, Superman. Charles has always dreamed of teaching the next generation of mutants, and back when we first worked together as the leaders of Task Force X, I shared his dream. I was not as fixated on it as Charles was, and still is, come to think about it, but I understood and supported him until our paths diverged. And now that we walk the same path once more, my skills are his to command once again. Of course, I have placed some precautions. Charles added, and Magneto nodded. It would take a stronger man than even I to go against those two formidable ladies. He chuckled. Were I a decade younger, I might be tempted to try to woo one of them, although I remain undecided as to which one I would seek to woo. Clark stared at the master of magnetism before sighing. All right. So, just to check. No plans to conquer the world or try to transform everyone into mutants. Should I decide to do so, you have my word that I shall resign from both the Institute and Bayville High first. Magneto promised, causing Charles to give him a look. No, I have no such plans. Thank you. Clark muttered, earning an amused look from Eric. Moving on, Charles said calmly, although a slight twitching of his lips betrayed his amusement, several of my people, and a few of Eric's, are going to come with Lilandra and myself. Jean and Scott are both coming, as are Chrome and Mist, both of whom are curious to see what other worlds are like. SHIELD, or SWORD to be more accurate, are sending along their team Beta under Agent Kimberly Taylor. She was one of the last agents personally trained by Fury. Personally trained by Fury? Eric asked in shock. Then I am indeed relieved that I never crossed paths with her. I have talked to Wand, but they do not have many operatives, so cannot spare one. Wait. Eric frowned. Wand? Who are they? Another subdivision of SHIELD, but one which deals with problems of a more mystical nature. Charles explained. Their full title is the Wizardry, Alchemical and Necromancy Department. They apparently recruit a number of fully trained wizards from the magical schools around the world and cooperate with their various magical counterpart organizations. The one in the UK is rather amusingly known as the Unspeakables. Any other divisions of SHIELD I don't know about? Eric asked with a disbelieving chuckle. Armor. Clark promptly responded. They're effectively acting as mission control and the overseers of the moonbase under cover of being a dedicated SHIELD team, although I'm not certain that they know that I know. Not surprising, since their remit is to monitor alternate reality incursions and provide intelligence to the groups assigned to intercept said incursions. If you're interested, their name is an acronym for Alternate Reality Monitoring and Operational Response. So much that I never knew. Eric marveled, then he frowned. Wait, should I know about them? Now that you're in charge of the Institute, yes. Charles said. Of course, should you choose to return to your previous path, you will forget everything you learned in this office. Eric froze. How? Mr. Black? Clark asked with a slight smirk. Henchgirl, actually. Charles gently corrected. She set it up for me just before she headed out on a mission for Mr. Black to a place called. I think it was Sunagakur. Sunagakur. Eric repeated. I don't recall hearing of a place with that name. Different reality. Charles explained. It doesn't really affect us, although if you decide you need more security for the Institute for any reason, the shinobi village of Kanahagakur is on the contact list. They can be trusted. Fury hired quite a few of them to help him clean up SHIELD. Eric stared at him in near shock for a long moment. There is one other important thing that you need to do before I can formally hand over the Institute to you. Charles prompted, and Eric seemed to collapse in on himself. I am a proud man, Charles. He whispered. I dislike having to apologize, even when I know I was in the wrong. It needs to be done. Charles said just as quietly, and Eric nodded. I agree. Clark, if you would be so kind as to ask my daughter to join us. It is time and past that I face the mistakes of my past, and take responsibility for them. Of course. Clark said as he rose from his chair. Wanda flopped onto her bed, still reeling from encountering her father. Something go wrong? Ororo asked, peering round the doorframe, and Wanda gave a slight shrug. Yes, no, maybe. Ororo slipped through, closing the door behind her, and sat down, lifting Wanda slightly so that Wanda's head rested on her lap. Wanda sighed as Ororo started running gentle fingers through her hair. Storm, you know that Xavier is leaving. I do. Ororo confirmed. I know where he's going, why, and some of the people who he's going with. Why? Well, his replacement is Magneto. Ororo nodded, her face reflecting her concern. I was aware of that. Is it going to be a problem? He apologized to me? Wanda growled. He explained that he couldn't help me, that he wanted me safe until he could find someone who could teach me how to use my powers, that hearing that Xavier and Clark had taken me and made him happy. Ororo remained silent, stroking the younger girl's hair in an attempt to help her relax. He apologized. Wanda whispered again, her mind flashing back. I am a prideful man, Wanda. In fact, many have said, with some accuracy, that I am arrogant. That I care only for those who are useful to me, that I place my goals above even friendship. There is truth in those statements. I have been forced to open my eyes to that which I refused to see before. To understand that my plans would have inevitably brought disaster on myself and the whole world. It was not an easy realization to make. I cannot change the past, Wanda. All the things I have done, all the mistakes I have made, I cannot undo, only try to atone for. And thus, I promise this. I will try my best to make amends for how I set you aside when you were but a small girl. I will do my utmost to support you as you make your own decisions as to what you wish to do, give you the tools you need to achieve that which you desire. But I will not try to control you in any way. I will not seek to force you into any given path. I did that before, and it was one of my greatest mistakes. I can only hope that in the fullness of time, you will find it in your heart to forgive a foolish man who got carried away in his dreams of the future and who lost sight of the true things in life. He apologized. She repeated. But Magneto never apologizes. Perhaps Clark finally got to him. Ororo suggested, causing Wanda to snort with laughter. Yeah, maybe. Beyond the Oort cloud, space seemed to twist and warp briefly, snapping back to reveal that a silvery shape had appeared, apparently from nowhere. For a long moment, the shape remained motionless, then it started to accelerate towards a distant speck of marbled blue. Chapter 20, Departures. Ah, Clark. And I see you brought your teammates. Zed called expansively as Clark entered the viewing gallery, the protectors in tow. Clark smiled at the sight of Zed with a grin on his face as his wife snuggled into his side. Go mingle. Clark laughingly ordered his team before making his way to the Kryptonian general, pausing only to exchange a few pleasantries with various diplomats and celebrities who had come to witness the departure of the Solar Expeditionary Force. Hello, godson. Ursa smiled as Clark stepped up onto the low dais where she and Zed were standing. Godmother. Clark nodded back respectfully. Governor General. Just in time, I see. Zed commented, then he waved to indicate the large hollow screen floating above the 3-meter-high viewport with its view of the floating vessels and something that Clark didn't recognize. Zed, what is that cylinder? Zed followed his gaze to the floating object. Over 4 times wider than any of the starships in view and with a depth of 20 meters, the floating structure looked incomplete, metal ribs and columns yet to be covered by an outer shell. That is the gate to Rao. Zed explained. How did you think we have been able to recover as much of the Kryptonian tech from Rao as we have? Especially the shield arrays that will soon protect our entire system. That gate is based on the doors that you and the Asgardians developed. Larger, and with a far greater range, but requiring far more power as well. It is set into a station at the other end and now it is in a defensive position. We will finish installing it into this station too, connecting both stations and allowing us to send ships through as well as simply stepping from one station to the other. And the ships are facing it, because... Clark prompted. It will cut their journey time and prevent the Shi'ar forces from simply backtracking them to here. Zed explained. Should Lilandra fail, the Shi'ar will not have proof of where they should strike back, only suspicions. Wow. Clark smiled. I'm impressed. And so you should be. Zed declaimed haughtily before Ursa elbowed him gently. And if Lilandra wins? Clark prompted. You have inspired my thoughts for that. Zed said, earning a curious look from Clark. If Lilandra wins, as we all hope she should, then we will use the station in Rao as a basis for expansion, a station that has the gate to Sol in the middle and gates to other systems arranged in rings. It shall be named the Nexus and shall be overseen by the Solarian Defense Force as a place where all sentients may meet and pursue trade or resolve diplomatic issues without the need of recourse to war. Have you been watching those sci-fi programs being piped in from the other realities via the moon base? Clark asked suspiciously, earning a hearty laugh from Zed and a giggle from Ursa. Ursa has become quite a fan of that series with the law enforcement officer and his wolf. Zed said as Ursa nodded. I prefer the one about the ex-military fugitives. I can empathize with how they were framed for a crime they did not commit, although some of the things they build really should not work. Clark started to reply, but he was interrupted by a chime that echoed across the gallery. The screen that had been showing the assembled task force switched views to show the bridge of the lead starship with 2 command seats. Lilandra sat regally on the primary seat while the slightly smaller one to her left was occupied by Charles Xavier, who had a familiar circlet adorning his brow. "Is there another Cerebro unit in that ship?" Clark whispered and Zed nodded in confirmation. "My friends and allies," Lilandra said, her voice sounding from the hidden speakers with perfect fidelity, "it is time for me to return to my home world to confront my brother, a task which I could not have dreamed of achieving without help. And help you have given, help beyond that which I could have hoped for. As I leave this safe harbor that you have provided, I do so in the hopes of returning in victory, of bringing with me an eternal alliance with the Shi'ar Empire, not of an imperium to a protectorate, but as true equals willing to move forwards to a brighter future. I leave you now with my most heartfelt thanks and gratitude. By the grace of the gods Shara and K3, I will return to you to present my gratitude, and that of my empire. Fare thee well, people of Sol System, and may you live in peaceful prosperity." As she finished, the ships visible as distant spots in the viewport started to accelerate and the screen reverted to show the vessels moving into formation to pass through the gate in turn. "Good luck," Clark whispered. "How did Charles do it?" Eric half complained as Clark and Raven paused in the doorway. "All that paperwork, at least it's good practice in fine manipulation. He uses his power to write with metal pens," Raven explained quietly to Clark. "He has trained himself to be able to write 3 different things at the same time." "Impressive," Clark admitted just as quietly, then he turned back to where Eric was scowling at one particular piece of paper. "I'm afraid it's time for me to head back to the moon base, but I'll be around this evening, should you need help," he said. "Of course, there's always Martha and May to ask." "Believe me, I have already asked both for aid," Eric sighed. Storm 2. "If I thought Sabretooth would do anything other than rip apart the papers, I would ask him to." Clark paused at that admission. "Sabretooth? He joined me because he enjoys fighting," Eric said with a slight shrug. "Despite his appearance, he is one of the best fighters I have ever met. No real style, but he has admitted to over 2 centuries of experience." "Oh, and he dislikes you. Something about Alaska, I believe." Clark snickered at the memories of dropping Sabretooth onto a snowy mountain. "I can see why he'd hold a grudge for that. He also enjoys exploring," Magneto added. "The last message I got from him said he was heading to New Krypton to check out the wilderness. I know the whole planet has been mapped out via satellite, but Sabretooth quite likes to find places that no one has ever set foot in before. That'll hopefully keep him out of mischief for several decades, at the very least." Clark mused. Given that Kandor has several zoos and Q&A storage areas which the Kryptonians are beginning to use to reseed the wilderness of New Krypton with Kryptonian plants and animals, slightly modified so that the animals don't develop superpowers, I think he will find quite a bit to amuse himself with. Eric agreed. "The others? I haven't kept track of. I thought that they deserved the chance of a truly fresh start." "Of course, should they get into trouble again." Clark nodded in understanding. "Fascinating. Absolutely fascinating." Susan Storm and Karsta Worrell exchanged worried looks as Reed's comment drifted out from his lab. "You check to see he isn't about to blow us up again, I'll round up Ben and Johnny ready to run," Karsta whispered. "You're stronger than me, and tougher," Susan protested. "You have force fields for protection and I can carry the 2 big kids faster than you can," Karsta countered, causing Susan to slump in defeat. "Fine," she growled as she stomped back to the lab. Stepping in, her eyes darted round, scanning the banks of apparatus and bubbling chemicals until she spotted her husband sat in front of the computer console, his attention on the giant screen in front of him. "Karsta," Susan said quietly into her communicator, "it may be a false alarm. Nothing's looking like it's about to go critical and Reed is on the computer." "Understood," Karsta replied. Dropping down from panic stations to stay alert. Susan fought down a giggle at the Kryptonian's response and deactivated the comm, but not before she heard her brother chortling on the far end of the connection. "Reed? What is it?" Reed turned his head to look at her, then his eyes widened. "Herbie, why didn't you tell me I was about to be late for the meal? Because you are not, there are still 2 hours until you need to prepare. Reed frowned. Then, what's happening? I came in here to ask you that. Susan countered. You said something was fascinating, and since that usually precedes an explosion. Reed blushed as Susan trailed off. It doesn't, does it? Analysis of explosions in the Baxter building indicate that 67.2% of them are indeed preceded by Mr. Fantastic using the word fascinating. If the words interesting and unusual are included, the percentage rises to 98.6%. Susan fought down the giggles that threatened to consume her as Reed simply stared at Herbie's presence indicator in shock. So, assuming that this isn't the prelude to an explosion, then what's so interesting? Susan finally managed. Wha? Oh. Right. Reed shook his head in an attempt to refocus. Sorry. Something came in between the sensor arrays without actually triggering them, but I was running a full spectrum sweep and picked it up. Its power signature is similar to ours, but rotated so that instead of propagating along the dimensions we perceive as reality, the energy emissions are instead flowing through the subdimensions in a way that cause the strange and charm quarks to temporarily switch their polarities. Susan raised a hand to halt the techno-speak and Reed face-palmed. I know. Dumb it down. Something bypassed our defenses and is on Earth. I'm trying to track it, but even with Kryptonian sensors, I'm having trouble. It is strong, though. If it was a mutant, it would be Omega class. And have you informed the protectors? Susan pressed. You haven't, have you? Reed's expression of embarrassment was all the answer that she needed. Call them. Clark here. Clark, it's Reed. There's a situation that you should be aware of. Clark looked up from the never-ending parade of E-forms he was having to deal with, a chore even with super speed. A situation. Clark repeated, raising a mental eyebrow. Define situation. Well, it doesn't seem to be an oh god, we're all going to die, but it could be too big for us, so I persuaded Reed to give you a heads up. Susan Richards interjected, causing Clark to chuckle. Can I activate the visual link? Visual, oh. Herbie, initiate visual communications. A hollow screen appeared and Clark nodded in greeting to Reed, who was sat in his favorite chair, and Susan, who was standing just behind him, leaning with one hand resting on his shoulder. So, you mentioned a situation. Unknown entity of possibly Omega-level power on Earth. Reed summarized, his hands busy. A set of hollow screens appeared around the one Reed was on, causing Clark to give the scientist a quizzical look. Did you just hack the moon base? Oh. Oh no, I simply expanded the visual link to include secondary screens. Reed explained quickly. Alright, if you look at this screen, you can see the star map showing previous power surges that seem to match the entity. If I do this, you can see that all the planets that the energy burst was recorded on ceased to radiate soon after, but the timing is slightly off. Now, the screen above it shows the one clear picture of the entity that I've been able to locate. Clark turned his attention to the screen in question as Reed continued. Now, xenobiology is complex. Without a chance to actually study this entity, I can only speculate. Although it seems to fit the masculine portion of the gender spectrum, the lack of any primary sexual characteristics make a true classification almost impossible. Reed, Clark interrupted, do you have a name for this entity? Based on its apparent means of transportation, I do. Reed admitted. The file I am creating is headed The Silver Surfer. Check the description for the links to the author.